Hi, everyone. Welcome back. If you've been with us for the last day and a half, you've heard a lot from JSTOR, and we thought it would be a good change for you to hear from publishers now about what they're doing, especially around open access. So in this one session, we have three speakers here to talk to you about two different models. The first model is subscribe to open, and we have Philipp Hess from Knowledge Unlatched and Vivian Berghahn from Berghahn Books to talk about their experiences in executing subscribe to open, and then we get a little bit of Vivian's decision making from the publisher perspective in choosing subscribe to open as the model to work with. And then the second model, we have Rob Dilworth from Duke University Press, who will talk about their decision to convert subscription journal to a library-funded model for a journal that they will be publishing next year. So we will start this presentation with Philipp Hess from Knowledge Unlatched. So I will see you again at the end of the presentation.
All right, thank you very much for the introduction, Barbara. And which brings me to my part of the presentation. And to give you a little introduction to myself, I am Philipp Hess. I'm the responsible person for publisher relations at Knowledge Unlatched. And we have done a little bit of a go at how to turn journals into the open with a subscribe to open model. And I would like to show you the agenda for what we're doing on the next slide. And there, first of all, I would like to give you a little bit of an introduction, general information on what we're doing and how we come together, where we stand as a company, before I go into the details of subscribe to open and what we call, well, what's the fuzz about, and then some practical aspects of how we could help you or how you could generally implement this project for yourself. And with that, I would like to go into the general information right away. Who are we? We are Knowledge Unlatched, and we are generally committed to making scholarly content freely available. So we have started with providing an infrastructure for book publishers, for journal publishers, and for generally everyone who would like to participate in open access by not only funding, but also distributing the content afterwards to several platforms, to make it available for everyone who wants to use it by providing MARC records, and we help publishers assigning all sorts of metadata distribution services, but those are the details which we can surely discuss another time. It doesn't have to be now. What are we doing? We are a marketplace, first of all. So we would like to help institutions get an overview of what kind of content can be provided and what kind of content can be funded. And with that, they can basically use their budgets to provide not only their institution with closed access content, but of course with UA content. We have generally helped publishers provide books to the open. By now, roughly 2,000 books, a little bit more, as you can see below. Our network consists of definitely more than 600 libraries who fund us every year or help us funding content every year. And we have made content of more than 100 publishers available already, with over 30 journals, with the project, which I'm going to explain a little more in detail soon. It will hopefully be up to 50 journals. And it's nice to see by now that we have a lot more than 8 million interactions on our content, or the content by the publishers that we help fund. And how we do that? Well, we have different tools and partner programs and services to increase the visibility of OA content. And one of the tools is going to be the subscribe to open content. On the next slide, I would like to show you a little bit how our general mechanism works. As I have explained, first of all, the publisher is always our focus, because the publisher comes to us, or we approach publisher with the information, you can make content open access. And then the publisher provides the content and basically submits the content to our platform, where in our standard model, I would say, library selection committee has a look at the content and basically checks is that content that is interesting for our institutions or for the general community, before we then as KU take this selection and bring it to the institutions who can help fund these titles or journals. This pledging cycle is usually from May until December each year. So the suggestions from the publishers will happen in the beginning of the year. We try to collect as much funding as we can from the library community until the end of the year to then make the content publicly available by December or January, February, March, depending on when the publication date of the titles will be. And now with that, I would take you to the next slide for a little deeper explanation of how Subscribe to Open can work. And that brings us to what's the fuss about. First of all, Subscribe to Open is an interesting method because it helps the publishers to turn the subscriptions they currently have to an open subscriptions. What do we mean by that? We do not want to get a completely new customer base. We do not want to make it complicated for the institution. We really want to make sure that everybody who's subscribing at the moment has the opportunity to remain their subscription and to basically take that into the future. And this is important because as Vivian Berghahn, who's going to speak soon, put it nicely at one point in time, the big elephant in the room are the sales agents and really the subscription agents such as JSTOR, who have a big responsibility in making this all work. And institutions are integrated with these sales agents, as we all know, and trying to make it as easy and as hassle-free as we put it as possible for institutions to continue to support this is one of the crucial points for us to turn these subscriptions into open. So there is no extra setup which is needed. It can basically be renewed through the current systems, and the institutions don't have to get additional suppliers integrated into their systems. They don't have to change their workflows. They don't have to make sure that any of the content needs to be integrated differently. They can access it through the same systems. But of course, everybody else in the open can also share and join the content in the way they would like to. And what we as KU are additionally doing is not only turn the subscribers over into an open subscription, but we make sure that there is additional revenue coming in for the journals. So what does that mean? If you have an institution who currently subscribes to, I'm making up house numbers now, 8 out of 10 journals, then we know this institution has a big interest in the journal portfolio of the publisher, often because there's a certain set of disciplines covered by the publisher, or there's a general correlation between what the institution wants and what the publishers offer. And we are then going to that institution, making them aware that there are additional journals which need support and which need additional funding, and then try to get them basically on board with additional subscriptions for the whole portfolio. That helps in 2 ways. First of all, that there will always be institutions who sadly decide to be free riders, so they might cancel subscriptions, or they might think that they can get the content for free now. So this helps on the one side to get the additional revenue as an basically exchange for subscriptions that might not work. Luckily, I can say at this point that most of our projects so far don't have a huge unsubscribing list. So most institutions still participate in the Subscribe to Open project, but it helps because it gives the publisher a lot of security on that point. And this also helps in the future because it helps that for upcoming years, there's an additional revenue growth for the publisher, which is crucial to make the journal grow, especially when you think about an open journal will always have a lot more usage, so a lot more visibility, will have more article submissions as it will become APC free. So there will be a lot more researchers who would like to continue and who would like to additionally be on board with the journal. And this will also bring me to the next slide, where I think it's important that there are some practical aspects of how this is being done. And I've already briefly mentioned that the renewals will always have to work through the existing sales agents. So it is hassle-free for the institutions and for the publisher as well, because you know where your revenue stream is coming from. You know that your systems are prepared to work with the open subscriptions and with the open revenue coming in, which means that everything remains as a streamlined workflow for you and for the institution. And there's one very crucial point, that there has to be a clear communication and a clear single point of contact for the publishers who can help you turn all of these over. By that, I mean that with JSTOR, so far you had the chance that you have one designated contact which handles your subscriptions. And it's important that we at KU want to make sure that this also happens for the future. And maybe to summarize, I want to work with the words of the great philosopher Bruce Lee, who said, "Be water, my friend," who basically wants to make sure that you have to work in the system as it is and don't try to pressure something on the system. So we don't want to make all of the workflows new with our project Subscribe to Open. We don't want all of the existing and standing subscriptions be more complicated than they were, but that it really is easy for the publishers and for the institutions and for the researchers to become open. And with that, I would like to bring it to one of our partners who has successfully transformed their journals into the open already, Vivian Berghahn. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Philip. There we are. Thank you. Next slide, please. Great, thank you. So just by way of background, to give you some context for our size and scope, Berghahn Books is an independent publisher in the humanities and social sciences, founded over 25 years ago by my mother. We are still a family-run firm. My eldest brother and I joined over 20 years ago, and I'm currently the managing director. We have offices in New York and Oxford, and our core areas are anthropology and history, but we have some key offshoots in related fields. We publish about 125 books a year, and we have nearly 40 journals, and they're all highly specialized in their fields. And this is an important point that sort of brings us above all to Subscribe to Open. We have a small list of open access books, and a quarter of the results of research funds, but the majority are thanks to KU, with whom we'd worked in the past on their select collections, and we've therefore been publishing open access books since 2017. However, our biggest transition to open access was with our journals portfolio, where we have 15 journals who have been flipped to OA, 13 of those owing to our Subscribe to Open pilot. Next slide, please. So while we are supportive of the ideals behind open access, and I think most are, the current funding mechanisms definitely have obstacles for many. So in our case, APCs just didn't work for us, not only because of the funding that is sparse, but there were also some real sort of ethical concerns that we have with how APCs are currently distributed. They're rife with inequalities, and they definitely disadvantage scholars who find themselves in weaker economic circumstances. This could be owing to limited research funds, which is especially the case for the humanities and social sciences, or it could be lacking host institutional resources, their career level. For entry level, this is obviously a very precarious situation for many academics, especially these days, or geography. In addition, there are also key parts of journals that are not eligible for APCs. So book reviews are a great example of some really key portions of a journal, especially in the humanities and social sciences, that are not APC eligible. Read and publish deals are also not a good option for a publisher of our size. Not only are they geo-bound, which is where we also had problems, but we're simply not large enough and our portfolio isn't big enough. And we also felt that they really do accelerate the inequalities in higher education, as well as the consolidation in publishing, which favors large publishers, all of which are also not very favorable to us as a smaller publisher. So when we discovered Subscribe to Open, which originated with annual reviews, we felt we had found the right solution. Next slide, please. So as Philip outlined, Subscribe to Open mimics the conventional subscription process. It has the key exception, of course, that the final result is that the journal is available not only to the subscribing library, but to non-subscribers too. But above all, it opens up open access publishing to all authors everywhere. Next slide, please. So as you can see from the timeline of our pilot, this was a process of careful consideration with the many pros and cons of going open access, which involved many of the stakeholders along the way. The defining moment was a workshop at MIT last spring where key stakeholders came together, and we're talking publishers of all sizes, small to the smallest to the largest, librarians, funders, journals, editors, researchers, and intermediaries like KU who were there, as well as EBSCO. And JSTOR, of course, Barbara also attended. And so we came together to discuss the OA landscape and talk about how a pilot like ours might work, but it also wasn't just about our journal, but also considering how models might work for other journals. So along the way, KU were also a really important source of advice for us in refining the pilot and then supporting us when we launched it. And I think the key here is, on the one hand, obviously, to talk about KU, but above all, just to talk about the role of intermediaries for publishers of a smaller size like us, where there are significant administrative burdens on our side too. And so simply we don't have the scale or the scope to really get out there and put our pilot in front of the libraries out there. So it was really important for us to be able to partner with somebody who could really mobilize their own sales teams. And so with that, KU helped us present the pilot to a range of libraries we otherwise would never have reached. So it's a big undertaking, and I will say above all also EBSCO as a subscription agent were extremely helpful in sort of allowing us to come up with ways that we could communicate the pilot to our subscribing and therefore then participating libraries to really sort of bring the message and make sure we were being as transparent as possible and really communicating what was going on as early as we could. Next slide, please. So at the core of this collaboration was Libraria, and in partnership with them, we responded to a growing chorus in anthropology to find an equitable and more universal approach to open access through our pilot. And Libraria have been key, and they've been really key to a number of journals who are looking to find ways to transition to open access. And it was really an ongoing and really beneficial collaboration for us, and to get those insights and to also help us reach libraries, but also faculty and anthropologists out there who were very keen to support the pilot. Next slide, please. So for our pilot, we selected 13 of our core anthropology titles on the list. And you can find full details on our site. We developed an extensive FAQ. We also have a list of participants as well as a more detailed history. But for us, the collection approach is what got the attention of the key libraries, and this is where we then worked with KU. So they helped us present the collection at the collections level to a number of libraries, and then we took care of the individual outreach to all of the other libraries out there who were subscribing then to a number of library journals that were then below the collections threshold. So in that way, the beauty of this model is that the library can continue at a single title level. So there's no obligation to upgrade to the collection. It was simply, as Philipp pointed out earlier, if in the case of a library that already subscribed to a majority of the journals, it was actually then beneficial for them to upgrade to the collection, then they could do so. And many libraries also did so out of support of the pilot. So they were really supportive of us undertaking this quite risky initiative to flip such a portfolio to open access. And many then even did so with a 3-year collections package, which was also really appreciated and was a big part of why we then, in the end, did then decide to flip in January to open access in 2020 for all of our journals. So there was a pretty significant leap of faith, but it was one that was really returning the faith that we had seen from many of the librarians with whom we corresponded throughout the fall of last year up until the launch. Next slide, please. So in that vein, so why would libraries support this model? I mean, as also Philipp talked about earlier, they are key in this whole process. Libraries have always been key curators, especially when we're talking about specialized collections like ours, and that's why I mentioned it at the beginning, because our kind of library collections for the journals that are very specialized, niche, small, where sort of heavy usage quantitative models just don't work, the librarians and above all the faculty in working together have a big part to play in deciding how and when a journal might be subscribed to. So in this case, as Philipp touched upon, the admin burdens of supporting open access are reduced by working within the systems that are already in place. But then above all, as mentioned, similar with the read and publish deals that aren't a good fit for publishers of certain sizes, they're also not a good fit for libraries of all sizes, yet libraries across the world are keen to support open access. So this gives them a way to support open access at a level that is more accessible to them. So, for instance, our average subscription in this collection is $245, which is extremely representative of humanities, social sciences journals for publishers of our size. So the barrier of entries are then also quite minimal. And we really saw that as a result, the response was very positive, and libraries really welcomed this chance and this way to support open access also globally. So this wasn't, just within libraries who were already strong open access components who were key supporters of the model, but also other libraries who were sort of more on the periphery, who came in and were able this way to support an open access transition. Next slide, please. So I would say that in this post-COVID budget scarce moment where we find ourselves, it's also a massively innovative moment in publishing. And I would say that this is the time to support diverse initiatives for truly universal open access. We really need to find ways to diversify the system, find new models, and this Subscribe to Open is a great model for publishers of all sizes and journals, therefore, to find ways to provide open access models. Next slide, please. So this is the collaborative spirit that continues with a newly formed community of practice, which is comprised of Subscribe to Open publishers alongside funders, libraries, and intermediaries to establish best practices and collectively promote what we see as a sustainable and, above all, vitally alternative model to some of the models that are out there, something that is far more accessible for publishers of all sizes. And you can see here a list of libraries, publishers who are currently part of the community of practice, which is ever growing. And in 2021, there look to be a number of really exciting transitions for a number of publishers moving journals to open access using Subscribe to Open. Next slide, please. So just to say thank you, and for another great example of a publisher of a similar size doing some innovative transitions in open access, I'll hand it over to Rob from Duke. Thank you again.
Thanks, Vivian. Hi, yeah, I'm Rob Dilworth from Duke University Press. I'm the journals director. And before I get into my slides, I wanted to provide just some brief background information on our acquiring demography as a journal. So in the spring, we were working on a proposal for the journal, and our initial intention in that proposal was to try to continue to publish demography as a subscription-based journal. But pretty quickly we realized that we would not be able to make a financial offer to the journal's owner, the Population Association of America, that would be viable. So we thought about it, and our director, Dean Smith, came up with the idea of transitioning the journal fully to open access, with the idea that not only would that be a good thing for the journal and for the world, but it would be a way for University Press to create a financial offer that would be competitive with commercial publishers. And also, I think in Dean's thinking, it was just a way to be bolder and to become more engaged with open access. We've been experimenting with OA for about 5 years with journals, and I think those experiments have been relatively small. So this was an opportunity to really ramp up our engagement and commitment. So in my first slide, let me go over some basic information about the journal. So yeah, the owner of the journal is the Population Association of America. And I think they deserve a lot of credit for accepting our proposal. So even though we made a competitive financial offer to the association, there's not a doubt in my mind that they are accepting less funding than they would have if they had stayed with a commercial publisher. The journal publishes 6 issues a year, 2,400 pages. It's the most cited journal in population studies. and its usage is very high. It's well over 300,000 hits a year. And through the end of this calendar year, it's been a subscription-based journal with hybrid OA, and it's been published by Springer. Next slide, please. So our goal really is to show that we can, that a university press can publish a subscription-based journal that's, held by a commercial publisher, move it to Platinum Open Access, and have a sustainable economic model via close partnerships and collaboration. And for us, the journal's owner, the PAA, they've been great in terms of coming up with funding ideas for us and really collaborating with us on almost every stage of thinking about the economic model. Lyrasis is a key partner as well, and we've talked to them from the very beginning of coming up with the open access idea, and so they're going to be key in providing infrastructure. And then Duke University itself has been really supportive, particularly the library and the provost's office. Next slide, please. So, so our model itself is really pretty straightforward. I don't think there's anything complicated about the model. What is complicated, or at least extraordinary on some level, will be the effort that we're going to put into the journal to develop systems, build infrastructure, and utilize our capabilities as a press. So we're going to be using our accounting team, our marketing and sales team, our customer relations team in some new ways. So with the model, we will be offering demography as a Platinum OA journal in 2021. So there'll be no fees to authors for that go to Duke to publish the journal online as open access. Our goal is to cover our publishing costs and our financial obligation to PAA over 5 years, and so that commitment will be about $1.25 million. We'll be partnering with Lyrasis, which is going to make it easy for us because they'll be making it easy for their member institutions to fund the journal. And then we're going to be pursuing multiple funders. So we will obviously be pursuing funding from libraries, but we're also going to be reaching out to individuals, universities, population centers, societies, etc. And we're also going to create an OA fund for the journal at the press so that if our fundraising targets aren't met, we'll have a mechanism to cover deficits. Next slide. That's it. And I guess one thing I was going to say before I close is I'm very positive about what we're doing. And I think, again, I think this is good for big journals. I also think it's good for university presses. I think we'll show that you can have a pretty substantial journal and try to transition it to open access in a way that levels the playing field between university presses and commercial publishers. Thanks.
Hi, I'll be joined by our speakers, Vivian, Philip, and Rob. I want to thank them for the time to make that recording, and we're excited to have a Q&A session with our publishers. Like what I did in the last session, I do want to get a sense of the publishers attending and what they might be doing right now. So I'd like to first launch into the first poll that we have. Okay, so you heard about a couple of models that Berghahn and Duke are offering, and so we want to know if you are offering any type of OA option yourself. So the options here, fees paid by the author, so the APCs, a read and publish agreement or publish and read agreement. Some publishers or societies make their journal free because of the funding or endowments that they receive from an institution or the society itself. Maybe some of you are doing subscribe to open already. And then if there's another model that you are utilizing to make your content free, please enter that in Slack or the chat box. While we wait for attendees to respond, do our speakers have any comments on these models? Are there too many options for a publisher to take? How does someone make a decision?
I'm happy to jump in and maybe take that. And I mean, I sort of touched upon it insofar as I think, I think there is something to be said that many publishers kind of employ sort of different models, which I think is important, because I think every journal, it depends on the portfolio. And I think it's important there to find a model that fits the journal and the discipline. And I think this is also with us why we took a very discipline-oriented approach, because also there within anthropology, the discipline itself was also very strong and very supportive of open access. And I think that was also an important consideration for us. And I would definitely say for publishers considering the transition, it really is down to the journal, the stakeholders involved, whether it's the society or the readership. And I think it can really be customized. And again, also question of resources and scale, I think also come into play there.
Okay, so the answers, an even split for the top answer between fees paid by the authors of APC charges and sponsorships with a society or institution. We have a few of you also working on subscribe to open, so that's great to hear. So thank you for that poll. Vivian, you touched a little bit about upon getting that support from the discipline. How important do you think it is for all of you, to get that support from a discipline? Or, demography is a top journal in the field. Do you have to, be a top journal to make this leap? Or even, with Knowledge Unlatched, Philip, it's a whole portfolio of a publisher, so there's some scale. What if you can't check off those boxes? Can you still do something with OA?
Yeah, I think definitely, and I would concur with most of what Vivian just said earlier. So I think you have to have multiple types of models because journals are so different, funders are so different. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I would agree there. It's interesting that there's one learning we definitely had. So we have the 3 S2O projects we have entered into over the course of the last year. One was Pluto, who has been completely represented by JSTOR in terms of subscriptions in the past. Then, of course, Vivian, and now the International Water Association publishing just recently. And the one takeaway is every publisher is different right away. So not only in terms of content, but also in terms of the structure behind it. So how is the journal funded at the moment? Who does the journal belong to? Where is it published? Is all so individual that I wouldn't say that there's a one-stop solution for subscribe to open in general, and it has to be worked on. So every publisher has the option and is invited, and I think it's super valuable to also hear what Rob said, for instance, with being able to secure funding, having something like a trust fund within the institution itself. To basically secure something like that. All of these are matters which help extremely to explore how this could work. We often, in other projects, try to do something like a matching fund, for instance, with a bigger institution saying if the overall revenue is met by 50%, the other 50% will be paid by this matching fund party. So there are always different options, and especially if you go into a specific discipline like anthropology, like water, or anything else, basically, there will always be a party of interest who has maybe more of an interest in just a subscriber to do so. So I think there's always an option to explore.
Yeah, and I was just going to add in with the discipline support, I think it's tricky because demography is a big journal. The field is big and there's lots of different institutions that are involved in demography, like population centers, societies have an interest in it. We have another journal called Environmental Humanities, and its model is basically it has currently like I think 6 institutions that fund it, and those are institutions that have like environmental humanities centers at their university. So that's a great model for that journal. But I'm not sure, for instance, a cultural studies journal would do that well, getting discipline-specific support, like a journal like Social Text that we publish. To me, that would be, we would really, if we were going to try to flip that at some point, which we're probably not, but if we were, that we would be looking to libraries to help us in that case, because I don't know that there are like cultural studies centers at different institutions. So yeah, again, every journal's different, but the discipline part is tricky, I think.
And I think also the pressures behind it are also important, right? So for us, although we are based in New York as well as Oxford, the majority of our contributors are European, and so for us, the European mandates and Plan S, were pretty considerate, an important consideration for us, even though those goalposts seem to move all the time. There are still mandates coming, even from the funders, even from universities, and I think in the US the landscape is currently slightly different, although changing, and there was an executive order that nearly happened at the end of last year that would have changed that also quite significantly. But I think those are also the readership, the authorship come into play. I think here in the US what we've seen are the libraries really pushing, some very key libraries really pushing open access. So I think there too, each journal will really, how, when, if it ever needs to transition to open access, also needs to take that into consideration.
I mean, there are a lot of changes, definitely. And once, I think there's a concern that once you go open, you can't go back. And the nice thing about subscription revenue, even though there's a concern, there's a fear that subscription revenue will decline, but it's sustainable. You know that's going to come in every year. So how sustainable are your options, do you think?
Is our subscription sustainable? I think the question is any model.
I mean, pivot.
I think these are definitely challenging times, and I think yesterday there was the sessions spoke on that, and today also earlier we really saw that. I think now also JSTOR will really only now start to see, because of the academic financial year, the impacts. I would put that out there as well. I think there have definitely also been pressures to move away from the subscription model, which I think that's also coming under increasing question to what extent that in itself is a model that libraries are prepared to continue to fund. Hopefully it can remain alongside all the other kinds. I don't think it needs to be one or the other. I think the question is diversity is key.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we also encounter the question a lot. If we have 3-year programs and everybody asks what happens in year 4, and then we say, well, you come from a 1-year subscription model. When did you ever know what happens in year 2, basically? And I think it's interesting that you said earlier that your subscription renewals are at such a high rate right now, and that's probably because of the usage, or generally just because institutions see, okay, there is a necessity for these journals. So even in times where budgets are low or cut, I think institutions see the need of journals being accessible, and it's always this two-sided coin. So even if you say, okay, there is no support that will help continuing the open subscription, but then it becomes a subscription journal again, and then the price won't be lower, basically. And maybe one interesting aspect that we explore at the moment, or that we always have on our radar, is also the usage. So we always look very closely at what is the usage in the institution, but also what's the usage surrounding the institution, or even how does the usage increase globally after a journal is open? What happens to submissions? Because for publishers, you can always see that more articles, more readership, more engagement on the journal will grow significantly. And if you have a readership and an authorship who supports this and wants this, then it's also good for institutions to be on that side. So it's not the direct impact of, oh, we don't have leverage in front of an institution to say you have to pay or you don't have access, but everything that comes with it increases also as a benefit for the institution.
Okay. A question that, oh, I'm sorry, Rob, did you have something?
Go ahead.
A question that came up very related to other topics from the other sessions about COVID-19 impact. How has that impact on library budgets impacted your ability to be successful in these models?
I mean, I'm not sure yet. We'll see. I mean, I think we're pretty optimistic with demography and feel like this is kind of a seminal moment, and hopefully libraries and other institutions will come in for it. With the journal that I mentioned previously, Environmental Humanities, we've been securing funding this calendar year for the next 5-year period. That funding has come from these environmental humanities centers, and we started seeking that funding at the very beginning of the lockdown in March. And for the first month, I was incredibly worried. Like, I thought, we are not gonna, this is the worst time to be seeking funding. But we actually exceeded our funding goal. So I'm pretty optimistic. In terms of the OA funding, I'm more concerned about the subscription renewals for subscription-based journals.
I mean, I agree. I think, there are definite, challenges to any model, especially something that's new, and you have to spend a lot of time explaining it. And really, communication is obviously key. But, I think because with COVID, everybody opened up and there was then a discussion about the importance of open and access. And I think with, remote learning and teaching and all the barriers of access that a lot of libraries had with suddenly having to support remote class teaching, there was this sort of conversation in parallel with how useful open access materials have been. And I think for some of the feedback we've then had from library supporters, I mean, these are obviously librarians who see open access as an important, really important in the future of where they want their funds to go. They're saying that now is, especially in a time of reduced budgets, now is the time to talk especially about how those sparse resources are spent. So this is almost seen as an opportunity to accelerate and underline the value of open access. So, when it comes to that, we're hoping that that remains a positive and shows a further value of a model like this.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that our experience is very much along the line of what the earlier JSTOR presentations have also shown, that giving access to these collections throughout the pandemic has been extremely valuable to readership, and we have encountered exactly the same experience from the beginning of the pandemic on, that people came to us in an almost dramatic fashion, asking us to have more content, how to access it, would we do more, can we do more open access available shorthand? And we said, yeah, if you give us the money, then we can do that. But I think it's really, especially in COVID, we see more need and more interest to also specific content. So people come to us and ask us, can you fund this specific collection, or can you fund these specific books? Which is something which was new to us, but overall, I think open access has actually benefited a little bit from COVID more than it overall has had a downtake from it.
This situation doesn't apply to you, but it does apply to many of the publishers who work with JSTOR. If you're an organization that publishes only one journal and you depend on that revenue of the journal to support publishing the journal and maybe even some other activities, do you have any advice for a publisher in that situation?
Sorry, my connection was completely lost. Can you please repeat that?
For a publisher who only has one journal and they depend on revenues from that one journal, any advice? I mean, it's not your particular situations for any of you, but we have so many JSTOR publishers like this.
Actually, we do, if I may. We had the situation in the past where we put together collections on topics, and we do that for books all the time, that we say we have an archaeology, anthropology, history collection, for instance, where publishers can submit books, and we did that for journals also in the past. We actually, the first anthropology journal we flipped open access from Vivian wasn't one of these collections, so it wasn't the anthropology collection overall. And we look into the option of doing that for the future years as well. That we basically say we have a subject collection, and then we look into what kind of publishers would like to work with us, what kind of journals would be submitted, and that we make a subject collection, which would then give exactly these publishers that you talk about the opportunity to flip also their individual journals. And maybe to add, this gives the great opportunity that if we look at all of the subscriber lists from all of these publishers and all of these journals, that also helps increasing the revenue for the complete portfolio then, because additional subscriptions could come in for these.
We are a couple minutes over time, so I do apologize for going over, but these are such great questions, and I thought the publishers would want to hear these answered. I do encourage Philipp, Vivian, and Rob to look at the channel. There were some more questions in that Slack channel, some specific ones I think targeted to you guys, and the conversation in Slack doesn't have to end today. We will have that Slack channel open, and everyone will be monitoring those questions. So I just want to thank all of you for participating, giving your presentations, sharing your thoughts, and encouraging everyone to take this leap into open access. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye. I'm going to welcome John back so he can give some closing remarks for our journal publishers who might not be continuing with the rest of the agenda that we have. So this is the last time you'll hear from me today. So I just want to say thank you again, publishers, for attending, for engaging, asking questions. Please reach out. This is not the last time or opportunity you have, to talk with us, and we just, look forward for expanding this relationship with you. Okay, thanks.